Hi everyone. Today's three stories start off in the area of Glen Canyon, Utah. Hikers discover something in a rocky area so treacherous that logic cannot support its existence. And then we hear what a listener experienced deep in the Bandelier wilderness of New Mexico. They were so far in when it happened that they had to spend another terrifying night exposed. Finally, off to Maryland, where we hear of the terror that a young girl experienced on her grandmother's farm. So buckle in and let's get into the stories. Hi, Lilith. I'm writing about what I call sort of an accidental hike that my boyfriend and I took out in the Glen Canyon area of Utah. We weren't actually in Glen Canyon itself, but more on the outskirts. We had driven a few states west with a group of 4 other friends in a shared caravan and had been at it for about a week and a half before we started getting sick of each other. Jared and I decided to go on a solo hike by ourselves to get a little space from the others and wind down. We left our 4 friends back at the RV park, and after seeing the crowds at Glen Canyon, this was late June, we decided to find a less popular trail. We always hike prepared, so I wasn't too worried about going off the main trails. We bring extra food, matches, water, and both of us have compasses. I even had a paper map of the area. We found a trail that looked more like a scratched up area over some rocks, and we dug in. It was a tough start to the hike, and the elevation ratcheted up pretty quickly until we were up probably almost 1,000 feet in less than half an hour. This area of Utah is stereotypically rocky. Think like those beige rock formations you see on postcards, and it can be really dangerous. There are a lot of little canyons, crevices, and grooves to shimmy up. At one point, I was pretty sure we weren't on the trail anymore, and I mentioned this to Jared. So we took a break to eat a few granola bars and check the map. After a few minutes, we figured out where we were, and I was right. We definitely weren't on the trail. However, the surrounding area looked passable, so we decided to continue exploring until the going got a little more tough. Elevation rose a bit higher in the next half hour, and when I checked my cell, I didn't have any reception. But the views were beautiful, so I just passed some time by taking a lot of photos. And then Jared called me over to an area that wasn't exactly flat, but kind of plateaued. We'd been looking for our next way up when he pointed at a section of the rock wall. It was rough, but there were numbers carved into the rock. At first, I thought we had found some kind of ancient civilization carvings. They aren't uncommon out in this area, but I realized that they were just regular Arabic numbers, like 1, 2, 3, but a whole string of numbers that, when we looked closer, they appeared to have been stamped into the stone. I looked at Jared, but he didn't know what could have done it, especially out in the middle of nowhere like this. I snapped a photo of the string of numbers, and after getting over an uneasy feeling, we kept going a little further. We had found a very shallow gully that went up and had to brace our feet almost sideways to climb it. This ended in a sort of a canyon area. Around the rim of and at the base of the canyon was stagnant water. It had rained a few days ago, so this wasn't surprising. I told Jared I wanted a break because, to be honest, I was kind of weirded out about the numbers. So I sat down to drink some water while he wandered around the rim for a little, and within a few minutes he was calling me. Honestly, I didn't want to go over in case he had found something more disturbing, but I didn't want to be alone either, especially now that I felt off. So I got up and I carefully made my way over to him. He had found a wide crevice in the rim that dropped down a few feet, and he was down inside there. He had to duck to fit down, but when he scooted to the side, I could see a metal door pressed into the rock. It looked unreal and industrial with these wide bolts and trim. There wasn't a handle that I could see anywhere, so I'm not sure you could even call it a door. I told Jared to get out of there, but he banged around on the metal for a bit before he finally started listening to me. I probably sounded pretty distraught. We were in such a remote area, and after the strange numbers punched into the rocks, I had no idea what we were dealing with here. Humans must have made both the numbers and the door, but why? What was behind the door? With it being so remote, it made it seem like whatever it was secret or dangerous. As soon as Jared climbed back up, I told him I wanted to leave. now. He tried to cajole me into hanging out and poking around a bit more, but I could tell that he thought this was weird too. We hiked back out much faster than we'd come in, and that night at the RV, Jared told our friends what we had found. If it was up to me, I don't think I would have ever mentioned it. At first they laughed, but I think the look on my face convinced them that we weren't kidding. There are a few theories flying around, including that it was some kind of a government hideout. I have no idea what they would do at such a remote location, especially since it was tough to get there. But I guess it would be a good place to hide things if that's what was happening there. Especially since the door was essentially smooth with no visible lock or door handle. I'm not sure how anyone would even get in. And of course, there was those carved numbers in the rock. It feels like bad luck to talk about it, honestly, but at the same time, listening to your channel has made me realize that a lot of people out there have seen strange things. This kind of fits in, I guess. I'd be interested to hear if anybody else has come across numbers and a door, but I don't suggest anybody go looking for it. I don't think you would find it anyway. Hi Lilith, I started listening to your channel recently and I decided I wanted to finally tell someone about this experience I had. After all the stories you've shared, I feel I'm not alone. It was about 9 or 10 years ago that this happened, but I'm still affected by it. I've heard a lot of wild camping stories from people I know, but nothing like this. I've always been an avid backpacker and I like to get into some pretty remote places. I mostly go alone since my friends aren't into it as I am. Yeah, I know that's not the best idea, and now I really know. I had wanted to explore New Mexico, so I made plans to hike one spring into the Bandelier Wilderness. The wilderness covers an expanse of over 23,000 acres, all within New Mexico, and I was planning to spend the better part of a week checking out as much of it as I could. I spent the first night sleeping under a gorgeous starry sky and listening to crickets. It felt great to be out there. And then by the second day, I was over 20 miles into the wilderness. Near the end of that second day, I came across a fresh mule deer kill in the canyon. I had seen mountain lion kills before, and this looked like that's what it was. Usually a fresh kill means a hunter is close, which also meant potential trouble because I was pretty sure hunting was prohibited, making this poaching. So I was on heightened alert and on the lookout for any signs. However, once I climbed out of the canyon, my mind didn't dwell on it, and I didn't give it too much thought after that. I was hiking along the rim of the canyon and I found a nice sheltered sandstone ledge with a shallow cave area on one side. The cliff of the canyon was about 15 feet away, and I had a clear view of everything to the south and the west, with the canyon directly north of me. It seemed like a perfect place to spend the night. I was only a few hundred yards up from where I had noticed the kill. I got my tent set up and anchored down. I ate my dinner and was just leaning back against the sandstone and staring at the sky. It had just started getting dark, and I was about to doze off when I heard this blood-curdling howl. I jumped to my feet, and I soon heard it again. I grabbed for my flashlight, trying to not get stabbed by the cactus or fall off the cliff. I wanted to assess the situation, but once I got the flashlight on, it didn't help me find the source of the howl. It sounded close, though, and angry, which had me thinking that the animal could scent me. I hadn't showered in days, and I was pretty ripe. The howl came again, and it was unearthly and unbelievably loud. I'd heard some wild noises in the mountains before, but not like this. It sounded like a whooping noise, and it seemed to be coming from the east, which was now the only direction I didn't have a view towards. I thought about packing up and leaving, but then I realized I would be a fool to try to outrun a mountain lion in the dark. I decided my only choice at that point was to wait and see what happened. I had a few big rocks collected and my mace in my hand. I had also had my hiking poles, which I figured would be better defense than nothing. I heard another howl that sounded further away, but then I didn't hear any more. By now the moon was rising and it was about 3/4 full and really bright, so I did have some night vision at least. I was crouched there on my sandstone cliff listening like crazy. But after a long time of listening and nothing further happening, I decided to get into my tent and try to sleep. I was exhausted, and I actually fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know how much time went by, but I think it was at least a few hours later when I was woken up by these rustling noises outside my tent, and this terrible smell that hadn't been there before. The moon was shining brightly at that point. I peeked out of the tent window and I could see something big and shadowy moving around. It didn't seem at all like a mountain lion. The shadow was huge and bulky and tall. It was moving all around my tent and shuffling in a way that made it seem really heavy. And then I watched it as it put its paw on the tent. I could even see clearly the outline of it against the nylon. And I say paw, but I almost want to say hand, like a huge ape-like hand, like at least twice the size of a full-grown man's hand. It was terrifying. The hand was moving back and forth, rubbing the tent, almost in a way that seemed like it had probably never felt something like that before. All I could do was lay there. I mean, what else could I do? There was nowhere to go except right into the thing. I didn't know if it would be better to be silent or if I should just make some threatening noises. Ultimately, I decided to just lay low and stay silent so as not to rile it up. I laid there imagining how long it was going to take someone to find my mauled body out there in the back country. It would probably be weeks and weeks, and I would be a skeleton by then. That thing must have spent at least 10 minutes shuffling around and feeling my tent. The smell of it was nearly overpowering. I could hardly stand it and twice had to hold back gagging. And then I heard what sounded like it shuffling away. I didn't sleep, and I didn't get up to look. I waited all night. It didn't come back. I got myself together at sunrise and I packed up as quietly as I could. I was really wishing and hoping that the thing was nocturnal and would be gone by daybreak. When the sun did break, I decided to look out, and all was clear. I started hiking out, but as far in as I was, I didn't have any choice but to spend another night out there. Luckily, despite me barely sleeping, nothing else happened. When I got back to my truck the next day, I was just a wreck from not sleeping for 2 nights and hiking all that way. I got home safely, but I swore to myself that I would never go out again without a weapon. My parents died when I was very young. We had gotten into a car accident and they passed away. Now I'm 25 and living just outside of LA. Yes, even with all the crazy riots and burning going on, somehow I'm still here. Before all the COVID and the civil unrest craziness, I was an aspiring actress and a model. But since everything's gone down, I kind of decided to possibly change my career. My grandmother looked after me on her farm in Baltimore when I was a kid, and it was very fulfilling. My grandmother was a woman of the land. She devoured books and read like nobody else I knew and could tell a story that would rivet any audience. As her only grandchild, I grew up being told of strange creatures near and far, some that flew in the sky, some that stalked through the woods, and some that even lived under my bed. These creatures seemed real to me, not scary at all, but more mysterious. I can still hear my grandmother's rattly voice telling me of the man that looked like a dog that she had spotted late at night rummaging through her bin. That was one of her stories that made me laugh. I figured it was just a local drunk that hadn't shaven in a few days, or a homeless guy. Since she's read so many stories about monsters to me, like the ones in the closet or the ones that will come out of the woods and grab you if you don't eat your vegetables, I had no really discernment of knowing that this was somehow true, what she saw. I'd also read in the Guinness Book of World Records that some people had so much facial hair that it grew minutes after shaving it. So I figured this dog man that my grandmother spoke of was a guy like this. But something about this was different. I remember her whispering to me, "No, no." Her gravelly voice shaking with trepidation, explaining to me that this was a sighting far more terrible than the rest, and it was real. My grandmother's father and mother had come over from London, England, and so she had a hint of an English accent. She didn't present herself like most country women. Her gray hair was tied up in an elegant bun, and she wore makeup even despite her face being lined with wrinkles from hard work in the sun. And then one night, when I was around 10 years old, long after the car accident, my grandmother had tucked me in bed, and I looked out at our small farm, out the stretches of land. By the way, at this point in the story, I was already living with my grandmother full-time since my parents had already passed away, and I was in the process of grieving and dealing with all of this. Anyway, it seemed a lonely place for any creature, I was thinking. Sleep was coming for me, and I felt that floaty feeling in your head as it's filled with nothingness, and images turn rhythmically, and then you enter dreamland. But I awoke with a sudden jerk, and I remember hearing something guttural, something groaning just outside my window. But the problem was, my bedroom was on the second floor and overlooked our prized chestnut tree, which was now orange and amber, with the Baltimore October bringing a beautiful autumn. Now I jumped out of my bed and looked out to see what it was. Perhaps one of my cattle had escaped, but that had never happened before. Not that I knew of, and never could imagine making a sound like this. This was almost a growl, like a gnawing sound, very animalistic, and I never heard it before. Pressing my ear to the window, I could hear the same rasping sound. I turned my head to the side and looked directly at our tree, and I witnessed one of the most horrendous, disturbing visions any child could ever see. My favorite pony at the time, which, by the way, my grandmother had several, her name was Jasmine, and she was dead, laid horizontally, her white coat ripped open and covered with blood, and her innards spewed all through the lawn. It was awful. I was in shock, and I started crying. Above her, though, was something even far more terrifying. I didn't make it out right away, but as I looked closer, I could see a large, dark shape that was leaning over her body. Whatever had killed her was right there. And then the shape looked up at me and stood up on two legs all at the same time. Large, yellow, glowing eyes and fur as black as the night and very, very large and muscular. It was like a ripped six-pack all throughout its muscles. It was so buff, and it had large black claws, each at least 6 inches long, if I'm not mistaken. This was what I could only describe to you as a werewolf or wolfman. Its face, however, was not that of a dog, though. And when I say wolf, I mean it looked like a really fierce, evil wolf with giant fangs that hung outside of its mouth. It even had blood dripping down its chin. Whatever this thing was had not only killed Jasmine, but was eating on her still. Although I wanted to turn my face away, I kept staring, transfixed in total fear and terror. My heart was sinking into my stomach, and sickness was rising to my throat. I was hoping this was a nightmare, that this horror before my bedroom window was fiction. I felt like vomiting. I was looking right into hell. My very own gallery of horror, and me in the front row. After this thing turned to face me, it crouched back down and turned its attention back towards its meal. I shuddered and nearly fainted, falling backwards. My grandmother was behind me, her mouth in open horror and concern. She convinced me that this was the devil. We went to bed, crying in each other's arms and praying for morning to come. My grandfather had passed away long ago, so it's not like my grandmother could have charged out there, barreling with a gun in its face. Nor was she the type of woman to do that. We both hid in her bedroom, locked, and cried all night. In the morning, the only real thing left of Jasmine wasn't very pretty. We gave her a dignified burial. Her carcass was now mostly consumed. The stories kept me inside for a long time, even though the experience happened many years ago, even after receiving much therapy. In fact, most therapists think the beast serves as a metaphor for my fears, some unresolved trauma welled deep in my soul. It really caused me a lot of issues during my high school years. And just like I told you, I stay inside most of the time. In fact, I missed a lot of social outings and opportunities to go hang out with friends a lot. But I know well different that this creature was real. The memory is so vivid in my mind. I've been on efforts to lock it away in the deepest parts of my memory, but it still emerges to haunt me, in my dreams and during my day. My grandmother died a while after the accident, and I continued to stay at a boarding school. I've never been back to the farm since I was a kid, and sometimes I still have the urge to go and see the plot where we buried Jasmine. I just hope that this experience can serve as a reminder to you, or to anybody else you choose to read this to never be too careful about being in the wild. Although there are some things that are just pure evil, I believe this was one of them. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Donovan Dread, who releases almost every single day. Also, if you like true crime, then check out Donovan Dread True Crime. There are new releases several times a week.